Welcome to the BLS Ground Crew podcast. Before we dive into today's topic, a quick disclaimer. While I am a certified advanced EMT, I am not a physician. The content in this episode is for educational purposes only and should never be taken as direct medical advice. The views expressed in this podcast do not reflect the views of my employers and are my opinions only. Always refer to your local medical direction and protocols. Hey everybody, welcome back to this week's episode of the BLS Ground Crew podcast. Today we're talking about medical terminology. Medical terminology is actually pretty important for EMTs to understand. Doctors at the hospital speak medical terminology, nurses at the hospital speak medical terminology, and it's important that we do too, to be proficient in our ability to communicate. Now, most of the medical terms or medical terminology items come from Greek and Latin roots. That's had a pretty big impact on the things that we say and the way that we say them. So sometimes a word might be spelled a way that you wouldn't think would make sense for it to be spelled that way, but it's spelled that way simply because the Greek or Latin root. There's a few things we need to understand when it comes to medical terminology. The first is a synonym. A synonym is a word that means the same thing, but is not the same word. So we might say that neck and throat mean the same thing, and they most of the time do. However, they might mean different things when we're talking about them in a medical context. Eponyms are words that are named after someone or something. Usually we see these in EMS and in the medical field based off something's named after a doctor. Homonyms are words that sound the same, but typically have a different meaning. A medical homonym might be the ilium and the ilium, like the colon and the ilius, or the part of the hip bone. Another might be lice and lice. Lice could be the things that are in your hair, the little parasites that could be in your hair, or it could be lice, or for a cell to die or explode. Those would be medical homonyms. Antonyms are words that mean the opposite of another word. So like superior and inferior. Those in medical terminology would mean the opposite of each other. One means above and one means below. Let's talk about word components. So we have the root word, and in medicine, a lot of times the root word will sit in the middle of the word. And we will usually have a prefix that goes before the root word and a suffix that goes after the root word. Those word components are root word, prefix to come before, and suffix which comes after. Let's talk about compound words. In medicine, we have a lot of compound words. For instance, one would be a cricothyroid membrane. So cricothyroid comes from two words. The first one is cricoid and the other is thyroid, but we call it the cricothyroid membrane because it's the membrane that is connected by the cricoid cartilage and the thyroid cartilage. As with the rest of English, we have plural words. And in medicine, sometimes those plural words can get a little bit confusing. So it's just important to know the plural word and the singular word, and how to pluralize that singular word. Let's talk about the three planes of the human body. So we have the coronal plane, and that separates the body from front and back. Then we have the transverse plane, which separates the body from top and bottom. And then we have the sagittal plane, which separates the body from left and right. Those are the three planes. We also need to consider the anatomical position. The anatomical position is what you would see in the Da Vinci painting. So it's a person standing with their arms at shoulder width apart and their arms down towards their side and their palms facing forward. And we're looking at the person from the front. That is the anatomical position. So when we talk about something as being proximal or distal, proximal means close to the trunk and distal means further away from the trunk. So with the hands facing forward, we have the fingertips are distal to the wrist, and the wrist is proximal to the fingertips. With all of our speech in EMS, we need to be accurate but concise. So if someone's having abdominal pain in the right lower quadrant, it might be easiest to say that somebody's having abdominal pain in the right lower quadrant, rather than trying to describe it in other more complex anatomical terms. There are four quadrants of the abdomen that we should talk about. We have the left quadrants and the right quadrants and the upper quadrants and the lower quadrants. So we have a right upper quadrant, a right lower quadrant, a left upper quadrant, and a left lower quadrant. Let's talk about patient positions. So there's a couple different ways to describe how a patient is positioned. The first is supine. This is a patient laying on their back with their face up and they're lying flat on the ground. The next is lateral. This would be a patient laying on their side. We can describe this as left lateral or right lateral, depending on which side they're laying on. Then we have prone. This is a patient laying face down on the ground with their back facing upwards. Then we have Fowler's. The Fowler's position is a sitting position. We also often commonly say semi-Fowler's, which is a patient sitting at about a 45-degree angle. There's a lot of abbreviations in medicine, but we don't frequently use those abbreviations in EMS. In fact, it's quite frowned upon to use abbreviations in EMS. We want to use the whole word. There's not very many appropriate abbreviations, but one of the appropriate abbreviations would be ASA for aspirin. We don't typically do that with many other words in EMS. We try to spell out and say the whole word to help people better understand what we're talking about. There's also a lot of acronyms in EMS. EMS is founded on acronyms. Any word that we could say will make an acronym. Any process that we could do in EMS, we'll make an acronym for it to help us better remember it. Now, I don't know that it always helps people better remember things because acronyms can sometimes be more confusing for me than just remembering the process itself. And you might also find that to be the case. It's not important that you remember the acronym, but it is important that you remember the process. And that's it for this episode of the BLS Ground Crew podcast. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the BLS Ground Crew podcast. If you found value in today's discussion, please like, share, and subscribe. For all of our audio listeners, please leave us a review. It takes only a few seconds and helps spread this valuable EMS content. If you'd like to see early releases and exclusive episodes, join our Patreon or become a member of our YouTube channel. Thanks. We'll see you next week.